distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, welcome you to the special International Security Forum event, which is entitled Nation Building, Lessons Learned. My name is Edmund Janiger. I'm the president of the International Security Forum, and I'm pleased to be helping host this event together with Professor Jean-Marc Aucoin, the distinguished professor of law and global affairs at Rutgers University. So Professor Aucoin, without any ado, let me turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Edmund, and thank you, colleagues, for taking the time to be here this afternoon and to share your thoughts and expertise on the issue of nation building and lessons learned. As Edmund mentioned, I am a professor of law and global affairs at Rutgers University. I've been at Rutgers for a number of years. Prior to this, in fact, I worked for the European Union and the UN. In fact, most of my career has been with the UN in New York and Asia. I served, among other things, as a speechwriter for the Secretary General in the 90s, and then I was in Tokyo in the 2000s working on issues of international law and international politics and dealing quite a bit with nation building issues. That's why I was very much interested in having Edmund putting on the table this issue of nation building lessons learned. So as you may have seen from, and so before I introduce the speakers, just let me know that, let me indicate the fact that this forum focusing on security issues has been in existence for a number of years. I remember that I think the first forum focusing on security issues took place 3 or 4 or 5 years ago in Rutgers. At the time, the main speaker was the Minister of Defense of Poland, who came all the way from Warsaw to address students at Rutgers. Of course, now we are doing these things online because of COVID, but so this is a recurrent event taking place once a year, twice a year. And I'm always happy to help out and be part of the event. So today we have two main speakers. We have Professor Mohamed Saliou Camara, who is the professor and chair of the Department of African Studies at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Good afternoon, Professor Camara. Thank you for taking the time to be here. I see that you are, good afternoon. I see that you are in your office and that you have a lot of books behind you. So I'm trying to compete with you, but I don't have as many books as you do. So thank you for taking the time to be here, and thank you for taking the time to share your expertise with us. And the second speaker is Reverend Manuel A. Cruz, who has been serving in the Archdiocese of Newark since. Are you still in Newark or not?
Yes, I am. I'm still in Newark.
So you have been based in Newark since 1980.
I was ordained a priest in 1980 and a bishop in 2008. But I've been here all these years.
So you spend a big part of your life over there.
Yes, yeah. My entire priesthood. Yes. So, and it's a great blessing.
Well, as a young man, I was trained myself in a seminary.
Oh, so, my goodness. Oh, yes, my God. Yes. So please don't ask too many questions.
No. I was in a Catholic. Yeah, I was in a Catholic seminary in the countryside in Western France. So
wow. Yeah, that's great.
But Newark is also a very good place.
Thank you so much.
And so thank you for taking the time to be here today. And finally, we have Professor Uchenna Ekwo, who is a visiting professor in the Department of Social Sciences at Nigeria's Coal City University. Professor Ekwo, are you here?
Yes.
There is a bit of a problem with the image. Are you calling in from Nigeria, or are you based in these days in the US?
I am in the US.
So yes, so I don't know, maybe it's the background that you are using that is a bit blurring the image. I don't know.
I
But
guess so.
I don't know, but I mean, it's okay. So, you know, depending on what Edmund thinks, maybe we can fix the technological issue or not. But I mean, once again, so thank you for being here. You know, this is my short introduction to the event. And so we'll start, I think, with Professor Camara, right, Edmund? So Professor Camara, the floor is yours.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you very much, everybody, for inviting us to this forum. And it's an honor to share this podium with such distinguished colleagues from Nigeria, from New Jersey, New York, and I am actually in Southern Maryland at home. Thank you. What I would like to talk about is within the context of the theme of this forum, Nation Building Lessons Learned, I would like to focus mostly on West Africa. In part because that's where I'm from. I'm from Guinea, Conakry in West Africa, but also because much of my research, practically most of the 7 books I have published so far are essentially focused on West Africa, even though at least 1 or 2 of them go beyond that. And my approach to lessons learned from West Africa in terms of nation building is that there have been a lot of efforts from leaders. However, it is safe to say that they have been failures. And those failures have manifested themselves in the forms of violent conflicts, including civil wars, going back to the 1960s, one of the first civil wars to happen in the region and in Africa, the Biafra War in Nigeria, but also more recent conflicts like the civil wars in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, in Cote d'Ivoire, and currently the violence, some try not to call it civil war yet, in the Sahel region, in Mali, and so on. I believe that these have been the result of a combination of factors. One, the failure of leadership. Because as Africa gained independence, the first generation of post-colonial leaders in Africa, many of them were very genuinely interested in nation building, even though the quote-unquote nation states or countries that we inherited from colonialism were seriously heterogeneous, and the double amalgamation of African populations, whereby you have some ethnic entities that govern themselves in centralized systems of statehood, were divided between 2 or even among 3 or 4 new colonies. And those divisions made portions of the same entity forcibly combined with portions of other entities to form a new colony that made only sense from the perspective of the colonial power, did not take into account the historical values, the cultural heritage, the vision and identities of the populations that were amalgamated. So African leaders inherited that. However, early on, some attempts at correcting that were voiced, either through some kind of regional integration, where we saw so far the most successful example of that would be the creation of Tanzania, which is outside of West Africa, but it's still in Africa, when Tanganyika and Zanzibar merged to create what we know today as the United Republic of Tanzania. Another example would be Somalia. From Italian Somalia and British Somaliland creating Somalia until the 1980s, when what we know started to happen and resulting in a failure. I wouldn't even call it a failed state, I would say a failed nation. Later on in West Africa, Senegal and Gambia attempted to create the Senegambia Federation. That didn't go well, and some say in part because the Anglophone small Gambia feared that the Francophone Senegal was here, this boogeyman to swallow the small piece and so on. Whatever the reality is, we have also the more visionary perspective that people like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana envisioned, the creation of the United States of Africa. So going from the minute nation states of post-colonial Africa to that grandiose continental federation or confederation, many other layers have existed there. And in 1975, when Nigeria was coming out of its experience of the Biafra War, the government of Nigeria understood that we need to have a regional dimension of nation building, where we can work together, have some sort of supranational governance and collective self-reliance. So that led to the creation of Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, then with 16 countries until Mauritania withdrew not too long ago. And now we have all 15 countries of West Africa being part of that organization that has been one of, I can argue, one of the most dynamic regional economic communities in Africa. So what some of the lessons main lessons I would say we have learned from everything that has happened in West Africa in particular is that there is an imperative need for leadership with integrity that is based on strong institutions and the rule of law. But when we talk about rule of law, we need to decolonize, to neo-colonialize the African constitutions and the legal systems of Africa, because otherwise the populations do not relate to the legal system in place, to the constitutions in place, because they don't reflect the cultural values, the historical heritage of the African population. They see it as an alien form of foreign domination, and there will be a lot of repression, a lot of coercion to make them adhere to something that they really do not embrace. We also need people-centered and development-focused economic policies. Because in many cases, whether it's in Nigeria, whether it's in Mali, whether it's in Niger, Cote d'Ivoire, you name it, even where they have not been civil wars, there are still internal strifes, because populations see that the resources, the national resources, are being mismanaged, and there is this system of clientelism that governments create, which channel the revenues from national resources to this particular ethnic entity, to this particular regional entity, to this particular religious entity, whereas the rest of the country is sitting there. Africa, as we know, is not poor. Africans are impoverished by bad governance, mismanagement of natural resources, and foreign infringement. I don't even call it foreign intervention. I call it foreign infringement, foreign interference, foreign encroachment. Otherwise, there is no reason why Nigeria, for example, would be in this kind of instability among its different regions and ethnic entities and so on, while being one of the major producers of one of the most strategic resources, oil, and also having, despite all the challenges, the strongest economy in Africa today. There is no reason why Guinea, my own country, the third biggest producer of aluminum, which has, as we know, one of the largest reserves of that, and being a poor country. So leadership is important. Secondly, we need citizen education, meaning how to bring mentally, morally, politically, socially, and culturally together, sensitize people of different entities with each country, how they should respect each other's identity, recognize each other's identity, and work together harmoniously to build a national identity. And there too, leadership, political, spiritual, civil society, business, military leadership should work together to devise a visionary perspective of nation building, to give the populations something big, visionary, but realistic to gather around and say, if we work together, we're going to accomplish this in the medium to long term for our children, our grandchildren, and going forward. And not just to be comfortable in kleptocracy, in institutionalized corruption. And I think that is a big problem. Finally, I mentioned ECOWAS a minute ago. I strongly believe, and I have been advocating for this in my writings and teachings, that nation statism should be transcended. Those small nations, these arbitrary borders that we have, Africa should use regional integration, whereby countries in the same region share a lot in common and can work together and reach a certain degree of integration, not mere economic collaboration, share some meaningful people-based integration. So far, even though ECOWAS or SADC in Southern Africa and others, you will see even the African Union is not people-centered because they have not been referenda or other forums of democratic consultation with the populations of Africa before any of these regional or continental organizations make far-reaching decisions that affect the lives of men, women, children, families, and communities in Africa. It's a top-down system. I am advocating a bottom-up system of regional integration, like in ECOWAS, for example, where the populations of the member countries will have a say through a democratic participation that would lead to the establishment of a sound supranational system of governance and a collective self-reliance among Africans that are in that region. That way, we can rely on one another, build not only the economies at the national level, but connect them at the regional level, so that the African Union's main job, would be to advocate and represent Africa to the outside world and allow these regional entities to do the nation building, not necessarily within the trenches, within the tunnels of nation statism as inherited from colonialism, but progressively integrate all these into regional sovereign entities. So those are some of my thoughts about lessons learned from the failure of nation building in West Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Camara. Thank you. Edmund, do we go to the second presentation, or do we want to have questions and answers to Professor Camara first? I mean, what do you suggest?
I think maybe let's move to Professor Bishop Cruz, and then we will maybe have some discussion, and then we'll move on to Professor Echo and have a discussion, if that's okay with you, Professor Kumar.
Yeah, no, yes. So Bishop Cruz, the floor.
Here I am. Okay, here I am. That was a wonderful presentation. And mine is going to be more about my feelings. You can tell by my accent, I am a Cuban refugee. I'm 67 years old, and I came to America in 1966 with my mother and father. So I grew up here in America. I went to a seminary in America, and I have served so many different communities. In Newark has been a great blessing because I have served the Puerto Rican community for years, and so many other families from Central and South Americans. Obviously, as a matter of fact, I was the first Hispanic being ordained to the Archdiocese of Newark. And Cubans, I think by nature, we have passion. And sometimes our passion, they blind us. And sometimes our passion will not allow us to express ourselves clearly. Doctor, your first conference, that was wonderful because you had facts, you spoke loud and clear, and ultimately your issue is mine too. And it is the issue of justice and the issue of freedom. You could ask the question, well, what would be the purpose of this conference? What do I want to achieve? And I feel very much at home here with all of you, because not only you're listening to the cry of an island that is crying for freedom, but it cannot be always about us. To talk about Africa, to talk about so many other countries in Central America and South America, where there is so much injustice and discrimination and a very poor leadership, it's good to have a very open heart and an open mind, and to not just can be about us. The Cuban people right now are going through a very difficult times. This pandemic has brought a lot of sorrow and pain. And as a matter of fact, just for your knowledge, they're preparing themselves for November 15th to go back on the streets again, and to go back to the streets to just ask for what is so basic in life, and is freedom. I'm sorry that I sound like I'm preaching, and I don't want to be preaching. I want to just share with you and sound like I know what I'm talking about. But freedom is something that is so innate in our hearts, in the marrow of our bones. We were created to be free. And there are so many countries right now. When you speak about Africa, my goodness, that there is no freedom, and where our people are frightened. And they're frightened of knowing that their day will end and they might not be here, and families will be separated and people being put in prison. I had the privilege in the last few months to be able to help a Cuban priest who was about to be put in prison. And once you're in prison in Cuba, you are forgotten. And that's one thing that I think should be discussed in this forum, the whole theme of silence. When you have passion and you encounter silence, it kills you. It kills your heart. And that's what Mundo asked me to come. I said, absolutely, I'll be there. And I will not do anything but change a little bit, perhaps, your heart, and to be able to have a voice. And going back to that Cuban priest, I'm a great believer of Schindler's List. In the book of Talmud, it says, you save one person, you save the world. And for me, that's so important, to be able to help anyone that I can, to be able to extend your hand and touch the wounds of others. And I cannot forget my people right now. And so therefore, I take this opportunity to say, your presence, listening to me, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I thank you, and please be attentive and knowledgeable and aware what's going on in Cuba. It's been 62 years of dictatorship, that there is so much killing and hunger and injustice that people can't do it anymore. Just people can't do it anymore. If you hear the videos that are coming out of Cuba, it's just amazing. People are saying, just kill me. It's over for me. There's no reason for me to be alive. You know, I have no freedom. And I think what the Cuban people are fighting now is they want to be heard. They want to know, they want the world to know what they're going through. And therefore, if at the end of this talk, you share this with your family member or with a friend. I heard a Cuban priest, Manny, Father Cruz, and he gave the same speech that everybody does. But it's good to hear about this country once in a while, and to know that there at this very hour, not only there's people who are hungry, not only they have no food and medicine, but they live in fear because there is an injustice. Remember, they're on the streets. They will go back on the streets again, but they have nothing to fight with. They cannot defend themselves. They're just going to be arrested. And the other day, it was so sad. I was on a video with a Cuban priest who said, I'm ready. I will be the first one on the streets on November 15th. So my little reflection is to follow what Professor Mohammed has done so well and has brought up facts, numbers, dates, events. I would like to do the same thing for the Cuban people, but also, Doc Professor, I join myself with you. And I feel you've done so well, because there you are now with tears and with screaming, but rather with facts and saying this has to end. And we hope that someday Cuba will be free too. So that's my little talk. But otherwise, here in Newark is a lot of fun, because ultimately it is about service. Ultimately, it is about service. As a professor, one of my very good professors told me 2 weeks ago, he said, Manny, if you do all this preaching and it's not rooted on real service, you're a window dresser. And I like that very much. It's a real challenge to me. So that's my small reflection, and take it from there. And let's see if someone at the end of the day has learned a little bit more about Africa, about Cuba, about Central America and South America, this is a great success. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Cruz. So Edmund,
Yes, so maybe let us take some few follow-up questions. So feel free to send questions via the chat to our listeners. I have some questions of my own, so maybe let me start with one of those. Sudan has, as the Guinea has had a coup recently, and I was thinking of what you make, Professor Camara, of the recent military coup that overthrew the civilian leadership there in Sudan and obviously northeastern Africa.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think personally, I'm not a fan of coup d'etats. However, I do believe we should take things on a case-by-case basis. The African military is not the United States military. And the rule that the military must completely and absolutely stay out of power, stay out of politics and everything, it doesn't work that way in Africa, especially when you have civilian leaders who do not live up to their responsibilities. When you have an entire country, whether that be Sudan or Guinea or any other country, God knows from the 60s to now, how many countries have gone through coups and counter coups particularly in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And now we are coming back to that. I think one of the reasons we see here, in Sudan, for example, this divisive mutual perception between quote-unquote Black Africans in the South and Arab Africans in the North that led to so much violence, waste of time, whether it's going back to the early years of independence all the way to the imposition of Sharia by the North over the entire country. I did my master's degree at Howard University on the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood on Nimeri's political thought in Sudan. And I learned a lot on that. And moving forward with the overthrow of Nimeri and everything that came about until the split of the country into Sudan and South Sudan. And of course, South Sudan has been engulfed in inter-ethnic violence since then. The military taking over, overthrowing al-Bashir after so much violence. At that time, I don't think there was any particular entity, civilian entity, or group of entities in Sudan that could end the dictatorship that had been going on for so long and the violence that had been going on under Omar Bashir. The military was the one. I'm not applauding them for the coup, but being realistic here. And unfortunately, the latest episode is in fact a reversal of what the Sudanese called the Sudanese revolution, that the military supported to overthrow a long-lasting violent dictatorship and progressively transition, hopefully, from something better.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Very quickly, in Guinea, I would say the military did its job. even though the leader of the military commander, Colonel Doumbouya, has access to grind between himself and the Alpha Conde government. But the Alpha Conde administration was really what I call the elephant that beget a mouse. Alpha Conde was supposed to be the father of multi-party democracy in Guinea for ages, was sentenced to death in absentia under Sékou Touré, was imprisoned for more than 2 years under Lansana Conté, and coming in being elected, Alpha Conde could have gone out with honor if he had respected the Constitution of Guinea. Again, a constitution that Guineans don't even, in many cases, relate to. But I hope that in Guinea, the current junta, the way they have begun and progressed so far, too early to say, but I hope that they take full advantage of the support that they have from the civilian population and not be intoxicated by power, and move the transition smoothly, and then in the post-transition, Guineans to take their own fate in their own hands. That's my analysis of those two.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Camara. So perhaps we can go to Professor Ekwo, Edmund, and hear his presentation.
Very cool. Let me see if you are ready to present. Professor Ekwo?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, the video is a little distorted, but
I don't know what's going on. It's still distorted, right?
it may be an issue with the background. So maybe perhaps you want to turn off the background, but let us
And Edmund, I have to apologize in advance. I mean, the time for the conference was changed a little bit, so I have an appointment at 1, so I'll have to leave a little bit before 1. And I apologize in advance to the presenters, to Professor Camara, to Bishop Cruz, and to Professor Ekwo. So I apologize in advance.
Okay. Is the video better?
No, I don't know. I may.
Okay, let me just talk though. But you can hear me, right?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So, first of all, let me provide some little introduction about myself. I'm originally from Nigeria, and I practiced journalism in Nigeria before I joined the academia. I got to the point actually where I became one of the leaders of journalists in Nigeria. That gave me an opportunity to really travel around Nigeria and parts of West Africa to understand the continent. And of course, actually in most African countries as a reporter. So I got involved in traveling around as well. So that's why you see me describe myself as a journalist by training, a teacher by choice, and a mediator by temperament, in that order. So having said that, when I hear the concept of nation building, I also associate it with regime change as well, that some of us are very familiar with in terms of how the West often intervenes in other countries. But since we are focusing on Africa, I will really limit my conversation on Africa. So let's preface this conversation this way. You know, I don't know, some of you may have read Julius Caesar's Shakespeare. I mean, Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, you know, where Brutus says, the fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves that we are underlings. Why I say that is, most of the time when I have this kind of conversation, I recognize that a lot of times the problems or the allegations about regime change or nation building quest of some other of previous colonial governments in Africa, most of the time, these things are really caused by Africans themselves. Let's face it. We may call the United States Europe, or anybody, at the end of the day, the problem lies with Africa itself. Because when we talk about nation building, there is hardly a situation where a foreign country can come and build a country without the collaboration or connivance of the citizens of that country. A recent activity, what happened in Afghanistan, is one evidence that there's a limit to which it can bring about nation building to a country. The same thing happened in Iraq. It's also happening, it's also there in Africa. So in the literature, you discover that most nation building efforts in African countries starts with domestic violence. It starts with political protests in different forms. Let me give you a case in Nigeria. I'm happy Professor Mohammed also talked about the civil war in Nigeria. The political elite, whether in the military or in the civilian class, they are the same people, they are the same. And perhaps not just even in Africa, even in other countries, you discover that there is a common bond that holds the elite about how to manage resources and how to share power at the detriment of the people they're supposed to be representing. So this is the same thing that plays out in Africa. So the history of the Civil War is all about, well, agitation for power. Yes, some other people might think that protecting the vulnerable or the marginalization and all that. While those things are factors, but at the end of the day, it's a function of ego, it's a function of people within the elite circle involved in contestation of power and sharing of resources. Nigeria potentially is a very rich country. Nobody in Nigeria should be poor. I happen to know that country so well. I've played my part. I was very close to the government, and even up to today, I know what some of the things in that country. But unfortunately, they cannot salvage that country because of their own personal issues and stuff. So, but again, sometimes people will think it's outsiders that are causing that. In 1989, let me talk about how political violence or protests even help in the cause of nation building. And when I'm talking about nation building, I'm talking about how structures evolve and how changes occur that perhaps either for the good or for the bad. All right. So, so these changes occur in a structured way. There was a military president, Babangida, who was in power within that period. When he came to power, I'm not sure I need to bore you guys down in terms of the history of coups in Nigeria and how they have always collaborated with the elite. But I can just mention briefly how the gentleman who won the election in 1993, that was perceived to be the freest election in Nigeria, has always been the friend of the military, and how his interests somehow intersect with the interests of the young men in the military who also want power, and how at the end of the day, things failed. His name is MKO Abiola. He was a publisher of a newspaper called National Concord. First of all, in the Second Republic, this guy, because he was so rich, he was a billionaire. He has well, there are stories about even some of the banks that operate in here that he has interest in. He's very rich. He made so much money through international ITT and all that. Don't tell me how. But anyway, he made so much money. And he's been fingered in several coups that occurred in Nigeria. So in the Second Republic, he funded the ruling party, National Party of Nigeria, that eventually won the election. And somehow he lost nomination because he thought he was building the party to assume the office, but things didn't pan out well the way he wanted it. So the northern elite, that kind of played him out, because he's from the south, asked him to wait until the next term. That was going to be in 1983. He did, but before then, they took the rug off his feet and disappointed him. Then he quit politics completely. And that same leader, Shagari, emerged again as a re-elected president in 1983. But guess what? before December, in 3 months' time, that government was removed. And who sponsored it? The same gentleman, right? So a government came into power. That's when Buhari came on board, December 31st, 1983, sacking the civilian government. Of course, you can always find reasons why you have to sack a government. Now, they came into power after 20 months. This same guy, he was publishing a newspaper and he needed to bring in some newsprint, which was banned by the federal government because they wanted to show up the local production of newsprint. And this government said they don't want to respect anyone, that they want to be straightforward, right? Anyway, long story short, he also engineered a coup that removed the same military government that fell apart with him under 20 months. So his friend IBB came on board. And actually, IBB wanted to hand over to him, no doubt, because he did a lot of, zigzag in the name of transition to military government, to civilian government. That ultimately came to the point where this guy now vied for the presidency and actually won, no doubt, he won fair and square. But the military brass refused that this guy will not take over the presidency and even threatened to kill IBB himself. What did IBB do? He quickly eased off and handed over to his friend Abacha, who ultimately imprisoned the same Abiola himself. It's a long story. So, but at the end of the day, the man died, Abacha died. So now these are domestic things. I'm trying to emphasize that nation building does not necessarily or can never come from outside. You have to deal with that internally. So the best form of foreign policy is domestic policy. So for Africa to thrive, it has to be a function of domestic efforts by the citizens. Having said that, let me also refer to how I was trying to emphasize how protests bring about change. In 1989, there was a massive riot brought about by the imposition of IMF loan on Nigerians, and they protested that. Well, there were some changes that came about as a result of that. Some of them hurtful and all that, trade liberalization and all, so on and so forth. But the bottom line is that the democratic transition that occurs in Africa is mostly as a result of domestic forces, not necessarily imposition from outside. I'm making this statement on the assumption that when you convene this meeting, you had this thinking that nation building imposed on Africa. So I beg to disagree that nobody imposes nation building on another country. However, citizens might think that, this is dictated by foreigners. I'll give you an example. As a reporter back in the day, I remember how ordinary citizens used to listen to BBC thinking that America was coming to save Nigeria. And I keep on telling them that it doesn't happen that way. Because even up to today, America is also dealing with some problems. In the Civil War, during the Nigerian Civil War, Richard Nixon, who was president then, actually had sympathy for Biafra. For full disclosure, I belong to the Biafra section of the country. So, and Nixon was in support of Biafra, including Charles de Gaulle. Charles de Gaulle actually played a supportive role towards Biafra. But at that point, he was the only Western leader in support of Biafra because Britain had interest in Nigeria. And of course, we know the relationship between Britain and the United States. So because Britain supported the North, because after all, Britain was really the architect of the indirect rule in the North that created the dominance of the North after the Civil War. So that made it impossible for US to be firm in terms of supporting the Biafra cause. In other words, the nation building thing did not actually come to pass, realistically. But there are other forces that also made the collapse of Biafra agitation to be possible. So, without also boring with the entire history, this thing has also repeated itself in several countries. Of course, we know how, even as recent as 1997, Mobutu Sese Seko left power, and the eventual dislocation that occurred, subsequently. In Ivory Coast, Houphouët Boigny was there for many years, right? Sometimes when leaders stay in a country too long, they bring about a situation where there is no succession of power. There is no plan of who takes over next. Consequently, when such leaders pass away or whatever happens to them, there is a vacuum. And the struggle to fill that vacuum results in catastrophe within that country. It happened in Ivory Coast. Of course, look at Zimbabwe up to today, they have not been stable. They don't even have a currency. So would you call that nation building from outside? Was it imposed by foreigners? The answer is no. So it's a domestic issue. I also want to talk about the whole concept of intervention in Africa. Yes, the CIA in the past, like what happened in Congo, the current DRC right now, what's his name again? President, the independent president, I remember his name, who was toppled in a coup. Yes, those days, yes, America used to get involved in, fashioning who becomes a leader of certain countries that will play their own part. But today, things are changing. So, but I want to address something that is also common, within the literature. China's, the struggle, the new struggle for Africa between China and the West. Most countries in Africa, yes, they are moving towards China. But China is not necessarily helping them in nation building. China is helping themselves. Because I was at a conference at Washington where we had this conversation at the Nigerian Institute of Peace. The difference between China's involvement in Africa and US involvement in Africa in terms of democratic values, in terms of economic interests, and so on. China will come to a country and they will even come with their laborers, even when the law of that country says a certain percentage of lower class positions should be filled by locals. The China will come with a cleaner, right? I was in Sudan, in Khartoum for 12 days, I think because of the government, when Bashir was there. I actually asked the Minister of Trade and Promotion, because that's what is happening. And he actually was honest and told me, because Sudan at that point was facing almost 2 decades of sanctions from the United States. He couldn't even use their credit card over there. So he told me that they had no option other to go towards China, who could provide some help to them. Okay? So, but China will look away. They will not be interested in looking at human rights abuses. They won't be interested in who becomes a president. They don't care about their politics, right? Whereas the United States will come to a country to help, they will give you some preconditions in terms of human rights, media freedom, independence of some democratic values, will be attached to that. So, but because of the dictatorial tendencies of most leaders in Africa, they will choose to go towards China, because China, of course, is an authoritarian regime. So, and most times, most African leaders don't want anyone to question them about how they're spending the money or how they're doing whatever they're doing. So, China will come, drill their oil in Sudan and do whatever they have to do. They don't care whether you're killing people in wars or whatever. They don't care. Whereas America will be interested in helping the vulnerable population and stuff like that. So at the end of the day, you discover that somehow the elite will masquerade and give the impression that they are working with certain world powers. And tomorrow, the ordinary people will think that, oh, America is helping to build a nation. They are not helping, they're helping themselves. And they're helping themselves with the connivance of domestic politicians. So that is clear. This is also something, because of my interest in media and the power of the information in changing societies, I've also told journalists in different African countries that I've been to, providing training and workshops and stuff, how their own reporting is also contributing to the false narrative about Africa in the West. Because if I'm in a newsroom in the West, I'm not interested in, oh, Sudan built a bridge, a dam that helped poor people. I'll be interested in seeing a story that will be of interest to Americans. For example, there's a story that I saw on MSNBC sometime and I lost to her, where there was a story that someone in Nigeria who stole $36 million. The story was that a snake swallowed the money. So that's very strange, isn't it? So, and that will be something that will be of interest to an audience in the United States, because that's so bizarre. And the nature of news is such that oddities, make news. Like New York Times will say, if it bleeds, it leads. So they're not interested in positive stories, they're interested in negative stories. So when, as a reporter in Guinea, you publish a story in the name of attacking the government or exposing whatever, you are further exacerbating the already bad image of Africa in international media, because they will go and pick, because first of all, they don't have correspondents to even come and get the real story. They will pick your story from the story you're writing, also to put it in context the way they will like it. That's also part of nation building, because if you're a reporter, you should also realize your role in nation building, because the image you portray of your country will stick and it will go miles. Having said that, I'm also going to bring it back to the new age in which we are today, where there's democratization of information, and the information sphere is so broad and wide that even the concept of nation building can never come from outside, it has to come from within. We're familiar with what happened in Tunisia, Egypt, and how the social media erupted and created vast change and vast participation of citizens. There is high increase in civic participation today than what it was in the past, okay? So there was a time, for example, in Nigeria, people just, I remember growing up also, BBC said this, BBC said that. So anything they had in BBC was gospel, right? Anything they read in major foreign organizations was the thing, right? But today, things are changing. Someone can create a story from Lagos, Conakry, and different other African countries. And I can see it here, anybody can look at that and verify that information. A senator is hiding something in Abuja. The staff can send me a story without knowing that I got it, I can share it and publish it over here. So things have really changed. So nation building somehow has grown even beyond just the so-called elite. Ordinary people are participating in governance today, and they are enabled by this. I tell my students, this is a smart bomb that it has created change, not just in Africa, but around the world. The extent to which that bomb is used will really determine how nation building occurs. Some of us are familiar with what happened with Daniel Fraser, the young lady who shot the video of George Floyd. See the change that has unleashed in the entire world. See the conversation going on. And the same thing is happening in Africa. So there's great penetration of the internet that is revolutionizing change, bringing about so-called regime change, and so on and so forth. People are wary about the power of these communication tools. That is why you see, even look at as recently, Buhari said he banned Twitter, but ultimately he had to succumb and, Buhari is the president of Nigeria. So you cannot do that. Even in China, no matter the extent to which you try to stop citizens from participating, they'll find a way of overcoming those obstacles. I once did a project with a Chinese television station in New York here. It's called New Tang Dynasty Television. That station is banned in mainland China. But guess what? Citizens still go and hide and find a way of getting their whatever, but they cover, even they put a cover on their window to be able to get the feed, to be able to watch this television, because that's the only authentic news source for most people in China, because they are not filtered by the government, because they broadcast from here in New York. So these are little changes that are occurring. So so the point I'm trying to make is nation building, or should I say regime change, will be most effective when there is collective action from the countries themselves. I want to talk about one more thing before I yield, because I have to make sure I don't talk too long. Let me talk about Africa integration. The recent Africa Free Trade Agreement is key. I had the opportunity of being on the same panel with this gentleman from, I can't remember his name, he's from Kenya, but he is head of UNCTAD, United Nations Trade and Development, something like that. So we're talking about this Africa Free Trade Agreement, which of course will create a major economic bloc. It's going to transform Africa economically and potentially politically as well, in terms of being one of the largest trading blocs in the world. And there's going to be free movement of people. You don't need a visa to travel to. If you're an African, you can move, just like you can travel in any part of the United States, visa free and all, and do business anywhere you want to do it. So hopefully that will really transform the continent if the political will persists in making that to happen. So the basic lesson I would like to leave all of us is to understand that transitions or democratic transitions occur when there is a concerted effort within the citizenry and not necessarily from outside. But that does not mean, I don't want to be misquoted, because I'm not just saying that there is no influence countries exert. There are. But in Nigeria, because of the complex nature of that country and its contradictions, it is really difficult. I can understand some African countries that are very small. Yes, there are some countries that can be influenced a lot by certain forces outside. But most big countries can really not be, shaken. Like, let me also talk about Nigeria particularly. There is no dictator who can survive in Nigeria. Quote me on that one. There are different forces in Nigeria that will make it impossible for any leader. Some have tried it and they failed because your tenure is up, because the media is the freest in Africa. They will hunt you, and you leave. So, but it may not work in some other small African countries, because, like Zimbabwe, when I hear that a country, someone has been in power for 35 years, it's really strange to me. You can never do it in Nigeria, impossible. And some other African countries anyway. So it's not homogeneous, even though Nigeria is a country that has many countries in them. It's a very heterogeneous environment, unlike perhaps some other countries that are more homogeneous. So these are some issues I want to share. I don't want to talk about all these differences, different components that make Africa, that ultimately, to the benefit of being West and all that, when they colonized Africa, they shared it the way they wanted. without asking who is a relative of this. You go to Ghana, you find someone from Togo who is related to this person. Yes, there's a boundary created by the white man that will be causing trouble, and up to today still causes trouble. Even in Nigeria, there are parts of Nigeria I go to, I don't understand their language. Nigeria has 350 ethnic nationalities, different languages. There are parts of the place, different cultures. When I worked in Radio Nigeria, those days we produce a bulletin, we have to read it in English, and some other cultures went to court and insisted we have to translate, because we're translating in local languages of 3 major languages. Some of them insisted they have to be included. Can you imagine you keep on to translate, give airtime to this language, give airtime to this language? It was difficult. Then I think things are changing anyway. Then it was just Radio Nigeria. We didn't have like private radios like we have today. So in summary, democratic transitions can occur due to factors, certain things happening within the society. Even the concept of multi-party and pluralism that occurred in the 90s and all that, these were generated by forces within these African countries, right? So, and I talked about the annulment of election and all that. So, but bottom line actually is that the future of Africa really lies in the continent, not outsiders. I will yield and listen to comments and questions.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Echo, for those words. And we touched a little upon Sudan, or the Sudans, maybe I should say more precisely. And I wanted to see what Dr. Camara and also you, Dr. Echo, think about the separation of Sudan into Sudan and South Sudan. As we know, South Sudan is now ranked as #1 on the failed state list. And so what do you see as a perspective for South Sudan and for Sudan?
Okay, I should start?
Okay.
Like I told you, in 2017, I was in Sudan. Actually, I was there on a delegation to evaluate the democratic changes occurring prior to, as part of the US quest to restore, remove the sanctions they had at that point. And believe it or not, I met a minister from South Sudan who came to one of the events where the president Bashir was, where they were having a convention of the National Conscience, National NCP or whatever, I can't remember what they call it. So I even asked him that question, right? It boils down to what I just said earlier, because it's just like even this Biafra we're talking about in Nigeria. Much as I recognize that there seems to be marginalization, but the truth is that sometimes these elites will just be looking for their own positions, not necessarily to help ordinary folks. So I asked the man, you guys are now fighting. You got your independence in 2011, right? 2017. Hekmati, I don't remember their names. The vice president and the president were perpetually fighting to the point the vice president was sent on an exile. So you now ask yourself, why did you guys pull out? Even the North in Khartoum, they were making a mockery of them. Okay, you want to pull out, you pulled out, now you can't even organize yourselves. So it's really frustrating, right? Because what people thought was that, oh, because there's so much oil in the South, that if they get independent, we utilize the resources better for themselves. But it's not true. The war is still continuing, cultural issues, they're still fighting. As a matter of fact, there's something I even learned at that trip, where some of them will claim to, because there's a cultural issue of where if you want to marry, you have to bring a cow to your prospective in-laws. One guy went and stole someone's cow And in the process, it sparked a major conflict. This was information given to me, the chairman of the National Human Rights Council. Some of them will have these, their tribal marks, and they go to the United States and say, embassy, and say they were attacked by whatever, and because they want to come to the United States, and of course they are giving concessions. So, and they are running away because of the hostile environment created by the elite that actually sought power to take over for themselves and not for the citizens. So that's the frustrating aspect of it. So it's real today. So most times when people are agitating for division or separation, they are not necessarily doing this for the interest of the citizens. They are doing it for themselves. They want to acquire power, and that's what actually has happened in South Sudan, the split of South Sudan. And look at even current Sudan right now. The crisis is continuing, even when Bashir has been removed out of office. Professor Mohammed mentioned something about this Muslim Brotherhood. If you study Muslim Brotherhood like he did in Egypt, Sudan has a similar pattern of growing from, because they have different ranks, and it's a very solid hierarchy. You don't just climb to become a certain public official. So from high school or something, they indoctrinate you, you keep on climbing and so on. Somehow, when I saw that, it looked good because it enhances civic participation, right? But to the extent to which it transforms the lives of ordinary people is what is questionable, because it looks like you want to become a politician, you want to benefit, you have to go and join the queue. Not necessarily to transform people's lives, because there are still poor people around the place and so on. So that's my take on the split between South Sudan and, because some of them who have been pushed away from power, they didn't grab what they wanted to grab, they are now causing trouble. And when this is happening, ordinary people are suffering and they cannot bring about the change. The oil companies are not able to perform because there's crisis all over the place, and people cannot even farmers cannot go to work. Most of them are even coming to the more stable north in Khartoum to get jobs. So now I ask yourself, why did they split? So are you to Professor Mohammed?
Thank you very much, Professor Eko. I think the case of the split of Sudan into Sudan and South Sudan is one of the most outstanding exemplifications of foreign impingement on African sovereignty. And by foreign here, I don't just say Western, because usually when people say foreign intervention in Africa, the West is the usual suspect. In the case of Sudan, it's not. It's not limited to the West. Sudan is close to, in a certain way, part of the general Horn of Africa, which is in a very strategic position, geopolitical strategic position next to the Middle East. And the Middle East having been this region where the interests of world powers and superpowers have been confronting one another for at least near to a century, long before the creation of Israel in 1948. It had been going on. And Sudan, even before its split, it had been home to one of the longest civil wars on the continent. On and off, perhaps, but overall, one of the longest. John Garang, who was the top leader of the movement from Southern Sudan, the movement for the liberation of Sudan, as it was known. John Garang did explain that the region of South Sudan was not seeking an amputation of the country. It was seeking equality, equity in governance to maintain Sudan as a nation, which was by geography, by size, the largest country in Africa. That comes with power. That comes with prestige, if you will. Plus now the resources that the country has. The Arab League interfered with what was going on in Sudan because the quote-unquote Arab state, Arab government based in Khartoum projected itself as a continuation of the Arab Middle East. And that made Saudi Arabia and other Arab Middle Eastern countries enamored with the predominance of northern Sudan over the rest. Britain, which in the latest years or decades of its colonialism in Egypt and Sudan, made Sudan officially what was called the Anglo-Egyptian Condominium, using the rulership of the Armenian kingdom that was in Egypt for decades, since the Ottoman Empire brought them there to rule Egypt and suppress the Mamluk rebellion against the rulers of the Ottoman Empire. Britain used Egypt to help rule Sudan so that in what is also known as the indirect British colonial rule, using local rulers to do most of the work that they would not have to import from Britain, colonial administrators, civilian, military, and others, make the colonizing of Africa cheaper for Britain and more rewarding in terms of resources. So the history of Sudan in that context goes back there and even further back, before even the creation of what we know today as Sudan by the colonial powers. Fast forwarding, we have when Nimeri, Gafar el-Nimeri came to power, he, according to many members of the Sudanese elite, when I was writing my thesis in the late 80s, Omar Bashir, then colonel, happened to be in Washington, DC at a certain point. And my academic advisor, John Hanwick, who had taught in Khartoum for many years and knew Sudanese society, put me in contact with Omar Bashir. I interviewed him as a military officer at that time, not in power. He told me what he believed to be the truth about Sudan. And then Professor John Hanwick put me in relations also with Hassan Turabi, who was at that time the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, who actually the Muslim Brotherhood that really, according to Turabi, they're the ones who gave Bashir a certain, Nimeri, I'm sorry, a certain political ideology to sustain his very shaky system. And according to Turabi, when I told him I was researching Nimeri's political thought, he said, you're researching nothing because Nimeri doesn't have a political thought. He takes whatever comes his way and so on. So with that kind of situation, and then the influence of the Arab League through Egypt, the influence of Britain, and later the influence of the United States. Because Susan Rice said not too long ago that the split of Sudan was the outcome of American foreign relations there. And of course, we know China is also very strongly involved there. Personally, the question I'm going to ask, are we going to say any time within an African country there are conflicts and contradictions between different components of that country, that Africans are immature enough to not be able to manage their internal affairs, to resolve these problems, maintain their countries, they have to be amputated. That Ethiopia, well, Eritrea, some would say it's the liberation of Eritrea from Ethiopia in the 90s. Some say, no, it's the amputation of Ethiopia. It's a secession. In Sudan, the same thing. Are we going to go with the Igbo nationalist movement in Nigeria to say, okay, this is not going anywhere? 1960s Biafra war, it was the Igbos, and today we have an Igbo leader who is arrested, and there is this secessionist. So let's make it clear, you know, the Igbo land is going to be separated from Yoruba land, and the north, the Hausa and Fulani region, Muslim over the north, is going to be separated. If we go that way, we will first start to understand why in 1963, in the Charter of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, there is a whole article that warned Africans from trying to violate the borders, the frontiers inherited from colonialism. The reason is there is gonna be a domino effect. The same kind of thing we have seen in the Horn of Africa with Somali irredentism. The Somali people, I'm not saying Somalians here, I'm saying the Somali community that you find in Somalia, in Djibouti, in Kenya, and in many other regions, in many other countries in that area, who are saying, well, listen, we are Somali, we are the same people. Regardless of colonial boundaries, we want to come all together. Well, what are we seeing now? Not only that is going nowhere, because that would violate the sovereignty of so many other internal countries around the region, we are seeing just the Somalian people, the smaller portion of the Somali identity, breaking their Republic of Somalia into Somaliland and Somalia, even though Somaliland is not recognized by many countries, let alone the United Nations. So personally, I think the split of Sudan was adding insult to injury for Africa, in part because that happened at the same time or around the same time. European countries were coming together to finalize the creation and existence of the European Union. There is integration in one portion. There was also the disintegration of Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, and the disintegration of the Soviet Union. So I would put the split of Sudan as a continuation of that Cold War philosophy and geopolitics. So as an African, I do not think that's the way we should go.
I just want to chime in if we still have time. There is some, when you are just talking, Professor Kamara, about all these interventions and disintegration and integration and stuff, an idea just came to another I didn't mention when I had the opportunity to do that. I wanted to talk about ECOMOG as a model. ECOMOG is economic monitoring group or something. It's kind of a military equivalent of NATO.
Yeah, the
That's
ECOWAS military monitoring group.
Exactly. So as a reporter, I observed and actually went to Liberia at the peak of that because Nigeria led that group. And it attracted actually the support or endorsement of the West, actually, because it was able to take away foreign intervention like in Liberia and Sierra Leone. So ECOMOG became a model of how Africa can handle its own problems rather than allowing foreign business to come and deal with their situation. Therefore, if the challenge that the professor just talked about in Sudan was such an issue, why not deal with the regional group to be able to intervene to find a way of resolving that? So at the end of the day, like I said earlier on, so Africa has the capacity to handle its own problems. I know we do violate some of those articles of the OAU you talked about, no intervention in other African states, right? But like ECOMOG became a model and it was very successful. Today, it's no longer there, right? I also know that Nigeria particularly was a very powerful voice in the non-aligned nations. During the political divide, the communism and all that, right? So there were some non-aligned countries that Nigeria became a force. I'm sure, Professor, you remember also even there was this flamboyant foreign minister Nigeria had, Joseph Garba, who was able to challenge America, about what was going on in Mozambique and all that. The Savimbi group and stuff like that, that ultimately helped in the emergence of the government that was not propped up by the United States. I remember Reagan was supporting Jonas Savimbi, giving him arms and all. Yet, Africa Angola. Yes, Africa stood firm, and triumphed in that struggle. So there are instances where Africa can do things by itself if the political will is there. But I also know that there's always this idea of trying to go outside. Again, most of them happen because of the electoral interest of the individuals, individual actors within the continent. So I just wanted to bring up this ECOMOG as a model of how somehow, and you see, that thing is not working right now because I'm sure everything is disbanded. Even there was this other thing that Nigeria did about sending foreign aid corps to different countries to assist them. They will export some of the talents they have, something close to this kind of peacekeeping thing or something like America will send some people and all that. So Nigeria was doing that at the point, but those things are no longer happening. Because, of course, the AU will try to copy the European Union, but in our own AU, the equivalent of EU, we just made it a geographical entity rather than even making certain criteria for people to be admitted into the AU. So, but I hope the African Trade Agreement probably will offset that dislocation of making sure that people who belong to a certain economic bloc should have some basic benchmarks for you to get there. Just like you can't just become an EU country when you don't pass certain tests and stuff. So those are some of the thoughts I just wanted to share.
Thank you, Professor Ekwo. Thank you, Professor Kamara, for the answers to that question. We have a question from the chat. So let me read that to you. Do you have any comments about the current civil war in Ethiopia? And I would assume that's directed to Professor Kamara and Professor Ekwo.
Okay, thank you. Yes, actually, in a way that that war is very close to me, because right now, as we speak, we have one of our faculty members in the Department of African Studies who is stranded in Tigray. And we have been doing what we can, working with the State Department, working with Red Cross, working with different agencies and organizations to secure his return, and also the State Department through the embassy, the US Embassy in Addis Ababa, is doing what it can with the United Nations to fly out American citizens who have been also caught up with that situation there. You see, I think this goes to the heart of the challenges of nation building in Africa. Depending on what side of the fence you are, you may say, well, Ethiopia is the only country in Africa that technically has never been colonized. Even if, in the 30s, Mussolini trying to emulate Hitler in Germany and to project Italy as a world power, invaded Ethiopia and occupied certain portions of the country for a few years. Ethiopia was seen, and still is seen, as this role model, or at least this elder, if you will. Elder in the respectable concept of African civilization, whereby its experience, its wisdom that informs being an elder. Ethiopia under Emperor Haile Selassie played a huge role in bringing together some regionalist entities that had been created in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s in Africa, that were making African unity impossible. You had what was called the Casablanca Group that included, of course, Morocco, Guinea, Ghana, Mali, Libya, Egypt, and the National Liberation Front of Algeria that was still fighting for independence. These were considered as the extremists or the revolutionaries or the progressists, depending on who you listen to. And then you have the Moravia group that was essentially co-led by Nigeria and Liberia, two Anglophone countries. And that is one of the other problems in Africa. We are still stuck in this artificial distinction between Francophone Africa, Anglophone Africa, Lusophone Africa, Arabophone Africa. And of course, powers and interests that want to keep us divided are playing that game so astutely that when I see 30-something heads of states in Africa rallying like, I don't know what, going to China, to Beijing, and sitting around the president of China and being lectured on development. Or I see no fewer than 20 African heads of state or government going to Paris, sitting around the president of France in the name of Francophonie, taking selfies about, all of this. I'm humiliated as an African, because that wasn't the promise of Africa in post-World War II, when we were becoming independent. And yet, today, that's what we are seeing. So, to me, what is going on in Ethiopia is one of those problems when a portion of the country at a certain point was the ruler of the entire country. Tigrayans did rule Ethiopia for a certain time. And the remainder of Ethiopia, and as you know, Ethiopia is so divided among ethnic entities over land and all that kind of thing. Anything happens here, everybody goes all the way to antiquity to say your grandparents, your great-great-grandparents did this to my ancestors, and today we're going to actually take revenge. So the federal system of Ethiopia is turning against Ethiopians in terms of nation building. And what is going on in Tigray, as far as I'm concerned, is also a huge problem. Because if Ethiopia falls, it's gonna be a bad, I wouldn't say example, I hope it doesn't become an example, but it's gonna be a bad turning point in the post-colonial history of Africa. Because to me, that would be like the United States falling. If it does, where would be NATO? Where would be many of the organizations love the United States or don't love it, but it is a world superpower. And being the world superpower comes with moral authority that the people and leaders of that country need to uphold. That war is going on in Ethiopia under the leadership of a prime minister who just not long ago won or was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. I think it is night and day, not just for Ethiopia, but for the entire Africa. I hope, as Professor Eko was saying earlier, that if not regional organizations, I hope the African Union, based in all places, based in Addis Ababa, that Africa comes to term with this crisis and tells Ethiopia, the Ethiopian government, stop it. Stop the bloodshed. Let's have a civilized conversation. And by civilized, I mean here an approach that is ingrained and encapsulated within African civilizational values. If we do that, I think the same way we resolved the Biafra War when the entire world, Soviet Union, America, China, Israel, everyone, France was taking sides, but I still have in mind when the former military leader of Biafra came back from exile, how the then president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, who some considered the winner of the war, how the two of them embraced two military enemies, till then embracing and showing Nigerians, okay, you know, we are burying the axe. Let's get back to being Nigerians. And the entire Africa applauded that because Nigeria is a role model for Africa, despite all the challenges. So I hope Africa takes responsibility when it comes to what is going on in Ethiopia. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kamara, for that answer. And let's see if Dr. Eko, Professor Eko, has anything to add. And I think then we'll be closing, and I think we'll give the final word to Bishop Cruz. So, Dr. Eko, is there anything you?
Actually, I'm going to leave the issue of Ethiopia. I think Professor Kamara has really had an exhaustive conversation on that. Let me take on the second question. What should happen to Bashir? Should he be put on trial in The Hague? Yeah, I'm on record on dealing with that question because I actually hosted a conference specifically on that issue. That was 2015 or 16, around about there. And my view is that the country should handle its own problem. If the rule of law should be allowed to prevail in Khartoum, rather than this ICC stuff. I'm opposed to the involvement of ICC into Africa, because since the establishment of ICC, it has only dealt with mostly African leaders, African people. So the Rome Statute, when it was set up, right? If we were to be honest about it, people like even George Bush and some other leaders around, even what's his name, Tony Blair, should have some questions to answer in The Hague, but nobody's talking about that. So going back to the answer, rather, I'm not just saying, on the second question, should he be put on trial in The Hague? The answer is no. Allow the international, the local courts to really handle the situation, rather than this view that ICC should be, policing African countries alone. But I'm not giving a pass to irresponsible behavior or maladministration in any shape or form. But I also think that there has to be a way we should exhaust all domestic mechanisms to be able to now subject ourselves to foreign countries that at the initial played a part in the colonial arrangement. So it still reminds, just like Professor Kamara was saying, it still reminds us of that colonial control, right? So, and also boils down to even the concept, the conversation we're having about nation building. So we should handle our own problems internally rather than externalizing our problems. Even what is happening in Ethiopia, for example, I'm happy you also pointed it out that Ethiopia was never colonized, right? That even like what is happening now, Mengistu Haile Mariam in the 80s, also had its own problems. Eventually he left. So countries will definitely, okay, let's even the way it's framed, the war in Ethiopia. It depends on how you even understand war. Do we say that there's a war going on in the United States right now between the pro-Trump and the anti-Trump forces? In every democracy, there's bound to be challenges, contestation of power, people will express themselves. It depends if people will even take arms. People are even killing people today in this country. Look at what happened in January 6th. That's war. But nobody wants to look at it that way. But we always frame the African stories in such a way that we're still those primitive people who cannot settle their own issues. So I believe Africans' problems should be resolved by Africans. There is, even in our prehistoric days, before the emergence of the white man into African culture, there have been ways we resolve our problems. There have been ways, because even when you say you take this man to, does it change the up and coming dictators in Sudan? Now, Bashir is not in power right now. But look at what's going on. So will you always take any leader that was removed from Africa to Hague? Like I say, it's just open, a whole continuum of intervention and all. And I personally, because I'm a Pan-Africanist, I object to a situation where people are taught how to do their own things. Africa is of age to be able to handle its own problems. That's my position on that.
Thank you, Professor Ekwo, for those words. And I think, is there anything that Bishop Cruz would like to comment on or add?
I just wanted to thank everyone. Myself has been a good hour and a half of 2 hours of great information and passion and seeking what we all want, freedom for our people. So Many blessings, and let's continue. And great job, Munjo. Great job. Thank you for bringing us together.
Thank you, Bishop Cruz. Professor Camara, is there anything you'd like to add before we finish up?
I just want to reiterate my thanks to you for organizing this, and the professor who left, Koi Code, and also Bishop Cruz for being here and giving us your moral enlightenment. And I want to also thank Professor Equo for being here and sharing, giving me the honor to share this podium with them. And I hope that we will have more opportunities to reflect on these and related matters, because as they say, we are all on this together. We should
Amen
work
to
together.
that. Amen.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to all those who participated in this event. Thank you to our eminent speakers. And finishing up, I would just like to remind everyone that the 9th annual Gershowitz Conference will be held November 5th on pandemic paralysis, what the media and government learned. And we hope you'll attend that event. This is an event organized by the Center for Media and Peace Initiatives and Rutgers University School of Public Affairs Administration. So thank you again, and we hope to see you all at the Gershowitz Conference. Thank you.